I have this really interesting habit after I've gone to a blade show because I always get the sense that I did not talk to everybody, which I didn't. I didn't get to see everybody's work, which I also did not. So there's this great channel that I like to go to, and many of you may know it. I go to ONeal Outdoors, and what he does, and thank God for this guy, he walks around the entire show and he goes table to table. He talks to each company, he talks to each person there, and he even talks to those individual knife makers who, in the middle of all the energy and all the big signs and the hoopla, sometimes they can get lost. So I love this service that he likes to put out on a yearly basis, whether it's Blade Show Atlanta, Texas, or West. He loves to put this out, and it gives me this opportunity to almost virtually meet these makers. Now, mind you, I've been watching his material for about a good 3 to 4 years, and every now and then somebody will pop out, and I'd kind of go, "Huh, that's a very interesting table there. Those are very interesting knives that they have." But there was one, only one, in my entire time of watching his channel, specifically when it comes to recaps of the Blade Show, that I had to pause the episode and say, what is that? There was just something about this one knife. It stood out, and I thought, what is that? Who is that maker? How do I get in touch with this individual and find out more about this knife? And the knife that I'm talking about is none other than the Big Bowie Chopper by Jeff Schafer. Now, mind you, the last time somebody's work caught my attention and I said, hey, what the heck is that? I got to learn more about it. I actually saw the Instagram of one of my subscribers. He and I have been messaging back and forth, and I finally decided to take a look at his profile. And that Instagram subscriber happens to be Bobby Rains, who now customizes my fighting buoys. Something catches my eye, there's usually something about it. And it is no different from Jeff Schafer, because it turns out that Jeff Schafer, who designed this absolutely exquisite chopping buoy, is the custom knife maker to none other than Master at Arms James Keating. How about that? I had a chance to message with him back and forth a little bit about this knife, but I also found out that as the custom knife maker to James Keating, he also happens to have just finished a custom crosada for Master at Arms James Keating. So it's really cool that I just happened to stumble upon this magnificent custom maker who keeps a really low profile. And I really hope that this video brings more attention to his Instagram and to his work. So a few things that stood out when I first saw it. First and foremost, there's just something about the profile, something about it that said, hey, this thing can do some really heavy work, but there's something about it just said that it's gonna be light in the hand. And this is just from watching ONeal Outdoors episode. The simple minimalist artistry, so utilitarian, but there was these extra touches to it that were so subtle. I thought, I gotta handle this. And yeah, I did find what those subtle nuances were. And of course, I went ahead and messaged with him just to find out a little bit more about what his thought process was when it came to the creation of this Schafer Big Bowie Chopper. So here are some of the questions that I asked him. I said, hey, what inspired you to make this knife? What are its primary and secondary purposes? What were some of your considerations when designing the blade, the handle, your steel choice? What is its edge geometry? What have you tested this blade on? What kind of hard use is it capable of? And what are your top 3 pieces of advice for future owners of this knife? And he messaged me back and he said, hey, Rolando, I'm glad you're liking the chopper. In general, the inspiration for this knife is I just love big knives. Well, so do I. I also love little knives, and mid-sized knives are okay too. The primary purpose of this big chopper was to be used as a chopper, much like a camp chopper. So utilitarian purposes first and foremost, for all the tasks around a conventional campsite, but the secondary purpose is as a fighting knife, hence the sharpened clip and the trailing point. Ooh, it's great for a back cut and kind of works like the way Bagwell described in his books of how a blade made for the back cut works. Things I considered when making the chopper: the steel is 80 CRV2 steel, and that is a very tough steel that will also hold a good edge for a while. Mind you, the 80 CRV2 is the same kind of steel that is used by Daniel Winkler on his R&D Tomahawks, and I've done episodes on that. 80 CRV2, really good choice. It is one of the toughest steels available, but has enough carbon to not sacrifice edge retention for toughness. In other words, it has the best of both worlds: toughness and edge retention. The blade design itself was inspired by one of Jerry Fisk's blades. The handle is one of my favorite handle designs. I use it on handles for smaller knives that one of my Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu friends gives to his students when they are promoted. But for this chopper, the handle angle is pointed a little down for more power when chopping. I learned that from Blade Sport champions. They taught me the angle on the handle was the best for power in the 2x4 chop. The edge is a convex edge for extra strength and good performance when chopping. And I said to him, "Hey, thank you, Jeff. Is this a knife that James Keating has handled or tested?" He said, "Nope, it hasn't been handled or tested by James Keating." He said he has chopped 2x4s in some hardwoods like maple and walnut, but he's also cut a lot of paper with it. So it can do fine work, and it can do the heavy work as well. This is a very capable knife. It can chop through lots of hardwoods and do any camp tasks that are necessary, but I'm sure it would quarter large game and is very capable of self-defense. The future owner of this should know how to take care of high carbon steel. Clean, dry, and oil after use. It is easy to sharpen with good hones. You don't need diamonds to sharpen it, and enjoy it and let the patina it develops tell the story of your adventures with this knife. I have to tell you that when I first handled this particular chopper, and something that I have been researching quietly and steadily for myself over the years, is this idea that the Bowie that Jim Bowie's brother Rezin gave to him in preparation for the now famous Vidalia Sandbar duel, which ultimately became somewhere between a 16 to 40 person melee, he gave him a knife that was described as a large butcher knife, which means that it has no guard. Why would the brother of Jim Bowie give him a butcher knife in preparation for a very heated debate between the Jim Bowie camp and the Major Norris Wright camp that it could easily have boiled over? Didn't give him a pistol, didn't give him a sword cane, didn't give him something that had a guard. He gave him a butcher knife. So I've always had this thing to try to understand the dynamics of the butcher knife. And as far as I'm concerned, this is perhaps one of the best I've ever handled, because this is the first butcher knife that I've handled where it also feels like a fighting knife. This kind of hits that criteria that was necessary for Jim Bowie to do as well as he did in the Vidalia Sandbar duel, but also to survive it with a butcher knife. And I can kind of see why Rezin might have given him something like this, because if he gave him anything like this at all, I can tell you that this is a very capable fighter. A few things that I do want to point out as a comparison. When we're talking about fighting buoys, nothing defines a fighting buoy more than the knives that Bill Bagwell had created. Notice that there is a guard, although it has a very similar pistol grip to the Big Bowie Chopper by Jeff Schafer. The guard is very distinctive, so that not only does it give protection to the hand, but it actually changes the balance dynamics of a Bowie knife. One thing I want you to think about is that when I'm doing snap cuts or back cut with a Bagwell fighting buoy, the idea is that there's enough mass on the guard so that when I do a back cut or a snap cut, the blade doesn't actually run away with me. It allows me to redirect it, or in the case of Bagwell, he has balanced it in such a way so that it will actually kind of self-guide and self-direct, so that I can execute the flow with minimal effort on my part. Similarly, if we take a look at Bobby Rains, and let's take a look at his famous Rainmaker design with the S guard, same dynamics. he has put enough of a guard here, not only for protection, but so that when I do a Bowie back cut flow, the blade doesn't necessarily get away from me. So when I do a back cut, the back cut terminates right here, which is going towards my opponent, which is where I want it to be, so that when I back cut, I can go into a thrust or a snap cut. We don't necessarily see this in double duty Bowie knives, or more specifically, choppers. Several decades ago, when I had a chance to get on the phone with Jerry Fisk and talk to him a little bit about this magnificent Camelus OVB Bowie knife, he did tell me over the phone that this is actually his daily knife. He has it on his belt all the time. And at the time, he was using it for all types of tasks on the heavy and on the light side. And this is a very, very nice Bowie, and it's very light as well, very lively in the hand. Now, one thing I want you to consider, the handle of the Camelus OVB, although it tapers in the angle of a pistol grip, it's not fully like a pistol grip, but it's also a little bit on the narrow side, so that this actually is a little more dedicated towards chopping, especially 2x4s. From what I remember, he has used this for practice on some of the competitions that he was a part of, but also so that if you're having to do any sort of push cutting or draw cutting, the handle is designed as such so that your palm aligns with it really well. If you have a rounder handle like this on the Bagwell Fighting Bowie, or on the Rainmaker Bowie that has its section, so it has a little bit more roundness on the handle, that back cutting, flowing, snap cut, thrusting is more conducive to that, because it really fills up the hand in a way so that when you move with it, turn with it, it kind of wakes up all of the receptors in the hand, so that the shoulder actually works in that fashion and optimizes the back cut flow. Whereas a chopper as dedicated like the Fisk OVB, where it is optimized for these competitions, when you're chopping into those 2x4s or chopping into those tennis balls, you want it so that this actually aligns for those tasks. There are no back cutting obstacles in that obstacle course. There are no snap cutting obstacles in that obstacle course. It's primarily slicing, chopping, draw cutting, and penetrating. One thing I want you to also consider is the relative narrowness of the blade, where a fighting Bowie tends to be on the narrow side, where a competition Bowie tends to be on the wider side. And you can see how Jeff Schafer, true to his word, takes some of that inspiration from the work of Jerry Fisk and translating it into his own interpretation of what a double duty chopper should look like. Some really fine nuances here, but just to give you an idea of what happens to the dynamics when you go from a fighting Bowie that has a guard and another fighting Bowie that has a guard, and then you start to reduce some of that guard so that it's a little more double duty specific, to the complete absence of the guard, is that now, although you can back cut with it to really live up to its double duty opportunities, notice that the back cut, when I back cut with it, turns towards me. So I'm going to do it here. When I just let my wrist drop, that knife turns towards me. Different from the Rainmaker, I'm going to let my wrist go limp. As you can see, it's pointing downwards. The Bagwell stays forward, and I'm just letting my wrist go limp. Stays forward. Because the chopper does not have a guard, when I go ahead and back cut, that extra material that should have been here for a fighting Bowie is now on this side of the knife. So that when I back cut, this chopper wants to keep going. It really wants to keep going. Does that make it more dangerous? No, it just means that you just have to change your movement dynamics. Because of that little detail where there's a little less mass because there's no guard, it will back cut really well. But just be mindful that it's going to swing back. It's going to swing towards you. And so now when you're going to go into that snap cut, you have to make some adjustments to your fighting mechanics so that when you're going from here to here, when you're going from that back cut and then going into a snap cut, you're not going into a snap cut. You're going into a chop. That extra heft over here is going to change your back cut flow a little differently. But my gosh, when you start to come back and go into that snap cut or that thrust or that chop, you're looking at a very different set of biomechanics. I think that this Jeff Schafer Big Bowie chopper has some dynamics that is very similar to the Filipino Barong. Similarly, a very powerful chopper, but also without a guard. So when you see me move with this, you're going to see a combination of some of that Bowie backcut flow, but you're going to see some of that Barong biomechanics that's going to make this probably one of my favorite Bowie knives. It just feels really good in the hand, but the fact that I can now combine Filipino Barong biomechanics with the Bowie backcut flow and the mechanics of that, wow, I'm excited just talking about it. It's really great craftsmanship, but there's a subtle detail to this, and I'm going to get to it in the movement portion. How this drops off here allows me to go from here to here, which now gives me a little bit more reach, but there's a very subtle thing that is very hard to catch on camera. There's a little bit of a bump right here, so it's not as smooth all the way down, just enough indexing so that when I am back cutting and I now have to switch to a chopper, you saw what I just did there. So one thing I really like about this chopper is that there's enough handle and enough tactile feedback so that if I'm moving with it like it's a barong and then a back cut, it gives me enough so that I can go to Dizon Mohara, Dagdag Bawas. I now have this pistol grip. I can align for that thrust. Look at that alignment over there. And I now have all this extra leverage for chopping power. What a magnificent job. And I can't wait to share this video with you. Thank you very much for letting me share. I hope you enjoy this video. Will the Schafer Big Bowie chopper behave more like a big fighting Bowie or more like a Filipino Barong? That's the question that I'm looking to answer in this movement session. Although it is smaller than most Filipino swords, it takes on to angle number 10 and 11 on the clock template as if it is a much bigger sword. This is very surprising to me because most fighting Bowies cannot even go to those angles without any sort of extra effort. The key for me now is to try to understand when it's going to move like a Bowie. For example, if we take a look at this here, this back cut actually turns towards me, which is very atypical of most fighting Bowies. So let's see where he wants to go after that back cut. So after the back cut, it looks like he kind of wants to chop through. It feels really natural for that. So let's see if I can add some templates to this. Maybe if I do a back cut and then some form of snap cut, again, back cut, some form of snap cut, feels pretty good. It aligns really well here. It's as if he wants to go someplace else. So let me try this again. I'm going to do a bit of a back cut, couple of back cuts here. Now I'm going to try maybe something a little different. Back cut, redondo. So let's try that again. That felt really good. Let's try back cut, redondo. Now it's starting to integrate back cut, redondo, and then let's try a little bit of a power assist. Back cut, redondo, power assist. And then once we have that, wow, that feels really good because there's some integration with the hip movement that you typically see in Filipino martial arts swordsmanship. So an integration of both the Bowie backcut combatives and then going into that wide redondo. So it's small circle, big circle. This is something that I can start to integrate very seamlessly with the Bowie chopper because of that extra heft along the blade. Plus, taking advantage of the fact that the back cut wants to go towards me, I actually have to move my body out of the way whenever I throw that back cut redondo combination. So this is starting to feel really good. This is starting to feel really natural. Notice how I can start to go in now. I can start to manage the range a little differently because when I go into these big circles and then these smaller circles with the back cuts, I can manage the range in a way that I can't necessarily do with a fighting Bowie because the Bowie combatives pedagogy borrows heavily from European traditions where the weapon tends to be more forward, whereas the Asiatic methods, specifically the Filipino methods, like to take the blade back and dissolve and absorb some of that energy to deflect and then redirect it forward. I can start to feel that because with this Jeff Schafer Bowie, this seamless integration between the Bowie combative
pedagogy along with the Filipino martial arts training and biomechanics in there, it's starting to help me integrate them both in one weapon. You can start to see the fulcrum assists, you can start to see the power assists with the hand, but along with the reversos and the back cuts, you can see how the hip goes into it. You can see how both of them are starting to seamlessly come together. But before I integrate, let's keep them separate first. So let's do some X patterning here. This feels pretty good with the X pattern, feels really fast. Now let's separate with the Bowie snap cuts. Let's do an inquartada, another inquartada, balisong thrust, gahudo thrust, and back cut. All right, this is starting to feel really good. Back to start to integrate it again. And then let's try doing it at speed. This is feeling really good with the back cuts, going back to the Filipino integrations. Okay, now we can see the power of this chopper, and I can feel all of the potential. And again, this is just the first walkthrough. A few more touch points before I start to go to about 80-90% of speed here. Let's keep it separate, bring it together, then center my mind and body at the task ahead of me. Now I'm going to start to bring my skill sets together. Bowie combatives along with the Filipino Barong template, and then I'm going to start to flow with the Jeff Schafer Big Bowie chopper. I can feel the momentum building in my body, the coiling and uncoiling along the hips, along the shoulders, and as it starts to build this momentum at long and short ranges. This is something that I'm really going to enjoy training with, and I'm going to start to build a curriculum around it because I think this is a very different kind of Bowie knife. It is a really good hybrid between a Filipino Barong and a Bowie knife. Although this was not his original intention, from a template standpoint, this is how it feels for me. I think it's going to take the Estacada curriculum onto another level, and it's something that I'm really going to enjoy sharing with you. So do stick around, stay tuned, because there are going to be more videos to come.